Imagine for a moment that your life feels like it's on track. You wake up, follow your routine, handle your responsibilities, and maybe even feel a sense of stability. But deep down, there's something lingering, a quiet unease you can't quite name. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it weighs on you. It's like a shadow, following you wherever you go, whispering doubts into your heart. You try to push it aside, telling yourself it's nothing. Yet, with every passing day, the shadow grows, slowly wrapping itself around your thoughts, your relationships, and your sense of self. Have you ever felt like no matter what you achieve, no matter how much you try, something is missing? Or worse, like others are always one step ahead of you, leaving you questioning your worth? Maybe you've even caught yourself wondering, why do they have it so easy while I struggle? It's not something you'd admit to others, maybe not even to yourself. But it's there, and it's draining you. This hidden sin, subtle yet destructive, is one that most of us have faced at some point in our lives. It starts as a seed, planted by comparison, nurtured by dissatisfaction, and fed by our own insecurities. At first, it seems harmless, even justifiable. But over time, it grows, spreading its roots into every corner of your life, choking out your peace, your joy, and your connection with God. And here's the truth: this sin doesn't just affect you. It seeps into your relationships, your work, your prayer life. It blinds you to the blessings you already have and traps you in a cycle of bitterness and discontent. You might not even realize it's there, but its impact is undeniable. It creates division, steals your happiness, and distances you from God's grace. What's worse, this sin thrives in silence. The more you ignore it, the stronger it becomes. The more you deny it, the more it tightens its grip. And just when you think you've gained control, it reappears. Sometimes in the form of frustration, sometimes as resentment, and sometimes as a quiet but persistent ache in your soul. Left unchecked, it can destroy not just your peace of mind but your very relationship with God. But here's the good news: you don't have to let this sin control you. You don't have to live with the shadow it casts over your life. The saints, including Padre Pio, have spoken about this hidden sin and its devastating effects, but they've also shown us how to break free from its chains. There is a way to overcome it, to reclaim your peace, and to restore your relationship with God. Think about it for a moment. What if you could identify this sin, confront it, and overcome it? What if you could replace its hold on your heart with gratitude, joy, and a renewed sense of purpose? Imagine what your life could look like if you were no longer weighed down by this invisible burden. Imagine feeling light, free, and connected to God in a way you've never experienced before. In today's video, we'll uncover this hidden sin, the one that Padre Pio himself warned could destroy your life if left unchecked. We'll explore its subtle yet powerful grip, its devastating effects, and most importantly, the steps you can take to break free from it. By the end of this journey, you'll not only recognize this sin in your own life, but you'll also have the tools to overcome it, restoring peace to your soul and strength to your faith. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever felt like something invisible was holding you back? Like there's an unseen barrier between you and the life of joy and fulfillment that God desires for you? If the answer is yes, then this message is for you. But let me tell you this: what comes next could change everything. The key to freedom isn't just recognizing this sin but understanding how to overcome it. The saints knew this truth. Padre Pio knew this truth. And today, we'll uncover it together. If you want to join me on this journey of faith and transformation, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll explore the wisdom of the saints, the power of God's grace, and practical steps to overcome the struggles we all face. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's uncover the truth that could set your soul free. Are you ready? Let's begin. Ethan sat in his modest home, gazing out the window at the sprawling city beyond. On the surface, his life appeared calm, even enviable. He had a stable job, a small circle of friends, and a community at church that welcomed him warmly. Yet, beneath this facade of normalcy, Ethan carried a secret that he dared not share with anyone, a persistent, gnawing envy that had begun to consume his heart and soul. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when Ethan could celebrate the successes of others without a hint of bitterness. He remembered the days when he found joy in his friends' promotions, weddings, and milestones. But over time, something shifted. As he struggled to advance in his own career, as he watched his peers build the lives he'd always dreamed of, a quiet voice crept into his mind. Why not you? Why do they deserve this, and you don't? At first, Ethan brushed the thoughts aside, ashamed of their presence. He prayed for contentment and tried to focus on his blessings. But the more he tried to ignore the voice, the louder it became. It wasn't long before it began to influence his actions. He found himself avoiding certain conversations, unwilling to hear about others' successes. He'd scroll through social media and feel a pang of resentment at every announcement of a new job, a new house, or a new child. Even at church, a place where he had once felt peace and unity, Ethan began to see others through a lens of comparison. One Sunday morning, Ethan sat in the pews, listening to a homily on the fruits of the Spirit. The priest spoke of joy, peace, and kindness, but also of the dangers of the sins that opposed them. Envy is a thief, the priest said. It robs us of our ability to see God's goodness in our lives. It blinds us to His blessings and chains us to bitterness. Ethan felt as though the priest were speaking directly to him. He looked down at his hands, clenched tightly in his lap, and thought about the weeks, no months, he'd spent feeling chained by this invisible force. He had allowed envy to cloud his vision, to steal his joy, and to pull him away from God. And yet, he still didn't know how to break free. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his room, Bible in hand. He flipped aimlessly through the pages, hoping to find some verse or story that might speak to his situation. His eyes landed on the story of Cain and Abel. He read of how Cain's jealousy of his brother's favor with God led to devastating consequences. Ethan's chest tightened as he realized how envy had driven Cain to act against his own brother. While Ethan hadn't taken any drastic actions, he couldn't ignore the fact that envy had already caused a fracture in his relationships and his faith. "Lord," he whispered, "help me. I don't want to live like this anymore." The days that followed were filled with moments of introspection. Ethan began to notice just how often envy crept into his thoughts. It was there when he compared his job to that of his more successful co-workers. It was there when he saw his friends posting about their vacations or new purchases. It was there when he sat in church, watching others seemingly live the perfect lives he longed for. Envy had woven itself into the fabric of his daily existence, and now that he was aware of it, he couldn't unsee it. One evening, as Ethan scrolled through his phone, he came across a quote from Padre Pio that struck him deeply. "If we only knew how to appreciate the blessings God has given us, we would never feel envy for what others have." The words lingered in his mind. Ethan realized that his envy was not just a reflection of his dissatisfaction with his circumstances, but also a failure to recognize the blessings he already had. He had spent so much time focusing on what he lacked that he had lost sight of the abundance in his life. Ethan decided to take action. He started small, keeping a journal where he would write down 3 things he was grateful for each day. At first, it felt forced. He struggled to find anything beyond the basics: a roof over his head, food on his table, and the ability to wake up each morning. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. He started to notice the small, beautiful moments that he had overlooked before: a kind word from a colleague, a vibrant sunset, the laughter of children playing outside his window. In addition to his gratitude practice, Ethan made a commitment to pray for the people he envied. This was not easy. At first, the prayers felt hollow, filled with obligation rather than sincerity. But over time, as he brought these individuals before God, something unexpected happened. His heart began to soften. He found himself genuinely wishing them well, asking God to bless their lives and their endeavors. And as he prayed for them, the bitterness that had once taken root in his soul began to fade. Ethan also sought counsel from his priest, who encouraged him to go to confession and speak openly about his struggle. In the quiet of the confessional, Ethan poured out his heart, admitting his envy and the ways it had distanced him from God and others. The priest listened with compassion and offered words of encouragement. "God's grace is stronger than any sin," he said. "When you surrender this to Him, He will help you overcome it." Slowly but surely, Ethan began to feel the weight of envy lift. He still faced moments of comparison and doubt, but now he had tools to combat them. Whenever he felt envy creeping in, he would pause and pray, asking God to remind him of His goodness. He would open his gratitude journal and reflect on the countless blessings in his life. And he would remember the words of Padre Pio, holding them close to his heart. Ethan's journey was not a quick fix or an easy path. It required daily effort, humility, and a willingness to confront the darker parts of himself. But as he walked this path, he discovered a newfound sense of peace and freedom. He began to see others not as competition but as fellow travelers on the journey of life. He found joy in their successes and gratitude for his own unique blessings. And most importantly, he rediscovered his connection with God. Through prayer, confession, and the guidance of the saints, Ethan realized that his worth was not defined by what he achieved or what he lacked, but by the immeasurable love of the Creator who had made him. If Ethan's story resonates with you, know that you are not alone. We all face struggles, and we all have hidden sins that threaten to pull us away from God. But there is hope. Just as Ethan found freedom and peace, so can you. Take the first step today. Reflect on your own heart, seek God's guidance, and trust that His grace is enough to transform even the deepest wounds. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll explore stories of faith, learn from the wisdom of the saints, and find practical ways to grow closer to God. Don't miss out on the journey. Click that subscribe button and join our community as we walk this path of faith and transformation together. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video. Ethan's descent into the shadows of envy didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like a slow tide creeping up the shore, pulling everything it touched into the depths. He had always been the kind of person who valued peace and friendship. He believed in the goodness of others, and he found joy in simple moments. But as envy slowly began to eat away at his soul, it changed the way he saw the world. It poisoned his thoughts and began to influence his actions in ways he never imagined possible. It started with small comments. Casual observations. Really. When his colleague, who seemed to have everything figured out, got a promotion, Ethan could barely mask his bitterness. Must be nice, he thought, but his words to others were more cutting. I don't know how they got that promotion. It's like they have everything handed to them, don't they? He didn't even realize the words were leaving his lips, but something inside him had shifted. That little seed of jealousy, once harmless, had begun to take root and sprout into something darker. Soon, Ethan found himself gossiping more often. It was like an outlet for the frustration building inside of him. The more he saw others achieve things he longed for, the more he talked about them behind their backs, trying to convince himself that they didn't deserve what they had. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. He knew it was a sin, but the more he gave in to it, the harder it became to stop. And each time he spoke ill of someone else, a small piece of his soul seemed to wither away. His relationships started to suffer as well. Ethan had always prided himself on being a loyal friend, someone who was there for others when they needed him. But as the envy consumed him, he began to distance himself from those who made him feel inferior. He couldn't bear to be around people who had what he wanted. His closest friends began to notice his withdrawal, the coldness in his eyes, the sharpness in his words. They wondered what had happened to the man they once knew, the man who could laugh and enjoy life without holding grudges. Ethan couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment when he started to pull away. He just knew that being around others made him uncomfortable. When someone succeeded, he felt exposed, like he wasn't good enough. His thoughts turned dark, spiraling into doubts about his own abilities and worth. His once confident heart now trembled at the thought of his own shortcomings. I'll never be as successful as them, he thought. I'm not smart enough, not talented enough. I'm just not enough. These thoughts gnawed at him, eating away at his sense of self-worth. But the most destructive consequence of envy was what it did to his relationship with God. Ethan had always found peace in his faith. He spent time in prayer, attended Mass regularly, and tried his best to live a life that honored God. But as envy took hold of his heart, that peace began to fade. When he prayed, it felt like his words were bouncing off the ceiling, like they didn't reach the ears of God. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was unworthy of God's love, that he was too consumed by his own jealousy to be in his presence. Ethan's prayers became increasingly desperate. He begged God for help, asking for the strength to overcome the envy that was slowly destroying him. But every time he asked for help, he felt like he was met with silence. The darkness of envy clouded his ability to hear God's voice, and the more he withdrew from his presence, the more isolated he felt. It wasn't just his relationship with God that was suffering. It was everything. Ethan found himself unable to find peace in the little things that used to bring him joy. He no longer enjoyed his work. He didn't laugh at jokes with friends the way he used to. Even his hobbies felt hollow, as if everything he once loved had lost its meaning. The only thing that seemed to fill the emptiness was the bitterness that was growing inside of him, feeding off his comparisons to others. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The burden of envy weighed heavier and heavier on Ethan's heart. He couldn't escape it. It was always there, lurking in the corners of his mind. And with each passing day, it took more and more from him. He felt restless, anxious, angry. His heart was full of rage, but not the kind that could be directed outward. No, this was a quiet, seething anger. A frustration that he couldn't express, a resentment that grew as he saw people living the lives he wanted for himself. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, he just withdrew deeper into himself. It was during one of these quiet moments of frustration that Ethan realized the full extent of the damage envy had done. He was sitting alone in his room, staring out the window at the people passing by. He watched them laugh, walk with purpose, and seem so full of life. And there he was, sitting in the shadows, consumed by his own bitterness. It hit him like a wave. This was no longer just a feeling. It was a prison, one that was slowly destroying him. He wasn't just envious of others anymore. He was angry at himself. He couldn't even remember the last time he had felt peace, the last time he had truly experienced joy. The consequences of his envy had become undeniable. It had alienated him from his friends, poisoned his thoughts, and torn his relationship with God apart. It had brought anxiety into his life and replaced the peace he once knew with a deep sense of emptiness. Ethan realized that he was losing himself. The person he had once been, the man who loved life and loved God, was slipping away. And if he didn't do something soon, he might lose it all. In that moment, Ethan decided that he couldn't keep living like this. He had to face the truth about the destructive power of envy. He needed to confront this sin head-on and find a way to overcome it before it completely consumed him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew it would take time, prayer, and effort. But he couldn't live another day like this. He couldn't let envy keep stealing his joy, his peace, and his relationship with God. And so, he took the first step. He prayed, not just for forgiveness, but for the strength to change. He asked God to help him let go of his jealousy and to find joy in the success of others. He began to reflect on the blessings in his own life, no matter how small, and to thank God for them. And slowly, day by day, he began to feel the grip of envy loosen. The bitterness that had once poisoned his heart started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. But the road to healing was not without its challenges. Ethan had to actively work on changing his mindset. Whenever he felt that familiar sting of jealousy, he would pause, breathe, and remind himself that God had a plan for him, one that was uniquely his. He didn't need to compare himself to others. He just needed to trust in God's timing and trust that he was enough just as he was. As Ethan's relationship with God deepened, so did his understanding of what true happiness meant. He realized that envy was a lie that told him he wasn't good enough, that he needed to be like someone else to be happy. But the truth was, he was already enough. And with God's help, he was starting to see the beauty in his own life, in his own journey. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced the weight of envy in your life? How has it affected your relationships, your faith, or your sense of peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it together. This is a safe space for us to support each other and find healing. And if you found this story helpful, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more journeys of growth, faith, and transformation. Together, we can overcome any obstacle. God bless you. His mind wandering as the priest spoke about the fruits of the flesh. The sermon was based on a passage from Galatians 5 verses 19 to 21, where St. Paul warned the faithful about the dangers of succumbing to desires that led away from the light of God. As the priest's words echoed through the cathedral, Ethan's mind was consumed by a sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. He had been struggling with envy for months, a quiet, insidious force that had been creeping into his heart and soul, eroding his peace and sense of self-worth. Today, the words of the priest seemed to strike a chord deep within him, as though God himself had orchestrated this moment for his reflection. The priest's voice rang out as he described the works of the flesh, among which was listed jealousy and envy. Now the works of the flesh are evident, the priest intoned, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and such like. Of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. The word struck Ethan like a thunderclap. As the priest continued, Ethan's heart raced, and he felt a strange lump form in his throat. Ethan knew that the envy that had been quietly destroying him for so long was not just a fleeting feeling or a harmless weakness. It was a sin, a destructive force that had its roots deep in his soul. He had heard these words before, many times, but something about them today felt different. Perhaps it was the weariness that had begun to consume him, the tiredness that seemed to grow stronger each day as he battled with his own jealousy. Or maybe it was the realization that he could no longer continue on this path without facing the consequences that awaited him. As the priest spoke of the consequences of envy, Ethan began to reflect on the deep toll it had taken on his life. He had once been a man full of joy, hope, and confidence. He had been known for his bright smile, his willingness to lend a helping hand, and his genuine care for others. But over time, that light had dimmed. Slowly but surely, envy had crept in, twisting his thoughts and souring his relationships. It had caused him to doubt his own worth, to resent those around him, and to live in constant comparison with others. He had lost sight of his own blessings, focused only on what he didn't have and what others seemed to possess. As the priest spoke of the consequences, Ethan's mind flashed to the people he had hurt along the way. Friends he had pushed away, colleagues he had criticized behind their backs, and the growing distance between himself and the God he once knew so intimately. But it was the words that followed that truly rocked him to his core. Envy, the priest said, is a shadow that steals the light of your soul. It clouds your mind and darkens your heart. It leaves you empty, never satisfied, always looking for the next thing to covet, always chasing after something that is just out of reach. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A shadow that steals the light of your soul. Those words haunted him. He had often wondered why, despite all his material possessions and successes, he still felt so hollow inside. Now he understood. It was the shadow of envy, always lurking in the background, stealing his joy and preventing him from experiencing true contentment. After the service, Ethan left the church in a daze. The words of the homily continued to echo in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. He had heard countless sermons in his life, but this one felt different. It felt personal. It felt like a direct call to action. Ethan had known for a long time that his envy had been poisoning his life, but today, he could no longer ignore the reality of it. Today, he was being confronted with the truth. As he walked home, Ethan thought about the words of St. Paul and how they had come alive for him. The works of the flesh, the things that led him away from God, were not just harmful, they were deadly. Envy, especially, had the potential to destroy not just his relationships with others but his very soul. It was a powerful force that could consume him if left unchecked, a silent killer that worked from the inside out. And yet, there was hope. The priest had spoken of the power of the Holy Spirit, of the way the Spirit could transform hearts and lives if only people would open themselves up to it. Ethan knew that he could no longer continue down this path of envy. It was slowly tearing him apart, and he had to find a way to break free. That evening, as he sat alone in his room, Ethan thought about the words of Padre Pio, a man whose holiness and wisdom he deeply admired. Padre Pio had once said, "Envy is a shadow that robs the soul of its light." Those words resonated with Ethan in a way that nothing else had. They were a reflection of what the priest had said earlier in the day, but they came with an added layer of depth. Padre Pio, a man who had experienced his own struggles with temptation and sin, knew the dangers of envy all too well. He had seen firsthand how it could devour a person from the inside out. And yet, Padre Pio also knew that it was possible to overcome this shadow, to reclaim the light of the soul, if one was willing to face the truth and open their heart to God's healing power. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he prayed, not just for forgiveness, but for transformation. He asked God to take away the envy that had been consuming him for so long. He asked for strength to let go of the comparisons, the jealousy, and the bitterness. He prayed for the grace to see others not as rivals but as brothers and sisters, deserving of love and support. And he asked God to restore the peace that he had once known, the peace that had been replaced by the anxiety and anger of envy. He felt something shift inside of him. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a burden that had been pressing on his chest for so long finally removed. He didn't feel completely healed. He knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but he felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of light in the darkness. He knew that God was with him, and that, with his help, he could overcome this. The next morning, Ethan awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to walk it. He had spent too long in the shadows of envy, and he was ready to step into the light. He began to practice gratitude, taking time each day to reflect on the blessings in his life, no matter how small. He began to compliment others genuinely, to celebrate their successes instead of resenting them. And he kept praying, asking God to help him stay focused on what truly mattered. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began to notice a change within himself. He felt lighter, more at peace. The constant comparisons, the jealousy, and the resentment were no longer at the forefront of his mind. He could feel his relationship with God growing stronger, and his interactions with others becoming more loving and supportive. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when envy crept in, when he felt the sting of comparison, but Ethan had learned how to combat it. He had learned to recognize it for what it was, a destructive force that had no place in his life. Ethan's journey was far from over, but he knew that with each step forward, he was reclaiming the light of his soul, the light that envy had stolen for so long. And with God's help, he would continue to grow, to heal, and to live the life he had called him to live. As you reflect on this journey of Ethan, I invite you to pause for a moment and consider, how has envy affected your life? Are you holding on to jealousy or bitterness? If so, what steps can you take today to start letting go of that burden? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your experience with us. Together, we can support each other on this journey of healing and transformation. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content that will help you grow in faith, peace, and joy. We're all in this together. Ethan sat alone in his room, the quiet hum of the night filling the air. He stared at the walls, his mind racing, a mixture of hope and fear swirling in his chest. For so long, he had been enslaved by the heavy chains of envy, an insidious force that had slowly drained the light from his life, pushing him into darkness. But tonight, something was different. He had made a decision to break free. He remembered the sermon he had heard at church, the words of St. Paul about the works of the flesh. Envy, jealousy, bitterness. The very things that had been ruling his heart, steering him away from God and his love. As the priest spoke, the weight of it all came crashing down on him. The truth was undeniable. Ethan couldn't ignore it any longer. His envy had poisoned his relationships, corrupted his mind, and clouded his soul. But in that moment, in the silence of his room, he felt a flicker of hope. He could change. He could fight back. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. The following morning, Ethan woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that breaking free from the grip of envy would not be an easy task. It would require strength, perseverance, and most importantly, the grace of God. Ethan had heard countless stories of people overcoming their struggles through faith and prayer, but now it was his turn to walk that path. And he would need help. Help from God, from his church, and from the wisdom of saints who had walked this journey before him. The first step was obvious. Ethan needed to confess. He had carried the burden of envy for far too long, and it was time to lay it at the foot of the cross. The guilt and shame had weighed him down, preventing him from experiencing the peace he so desperately longed for. So, with a heart full of both fear and determination, Ethan made his way to the confessional. As he knelt before the priest, he felt his hands tremble, his heart pounding in his chest. The words that had been trapped inside for so long finally escaped. He confessed his envy, his jealousy, and his resentment. The priest listened quietly, offering words of reassurance, reminding Ethan that God's mercy was greater than any sin. "Go in peace, my son," the priest said softly. "Your sins are forgiven. But remember, healing comes through action. Keep turning to God, and He will guide you on the path to redemption." Ethan left the confessional feeling a sense of relief, but also a deep sense of responsibility. Confession was not just a one-time event. It was the beginning of a lifelong journey of transformation. He knew he had to stay committed to this path, to make the effort to turn away from envy and towards God's light. That afternoon, Ethan sat at his desk, pondering how to make this change in his life. He had heard of Padre Pio's daily meditations and his dedication to prayer, and he knew that if there was one thing that had the power to transform his heart, it was prayer. Padre Pio, a man who had struggled with his own trials, had turned to prayer and meditation as his way of finding peace. If prayer had worked for him, it could work for Ethan too. So, Ethan began the practice of daily meditation. Every morning, before the world around him began to stir, he would sit quietly and open his Bible. He started with the Psalms, finding solace in their ancient words. One psalm that particularly spoke to him was Psalm 37, a prayer of trust in God's providence. As he read the words, he felt a deep connection to their message. "Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass, and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord, and do good. So shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart." These words seemed to pierce through the layers of bitterness and resentment that had accumulated in Ethan's soul. The message was clear. He didn't need to worry about the success or prosperity of others. God had a plan for him, and it was far greater than anything he could have imagined. All he had to do was trust in the Lord, let go of his envy, and follow the path that God had laid out for him. Ethan began to incorporate this meditation into his daily routine. Each morning, he would wake up early, sit in the quiet of his room, and read through the Psalms. He would meditate on the words, letting them sink deep into his heart. Slowly but surely, the poison of envy that had been festering inside him began to lose its power. It was not an instant transformation, but Ethan began to feel the shift. There was peace where there had been anxiety. There was joy where there had been bitterness. And there was hope where there had been despair. But it wasn't just the meditation that was changing Ethan's heart. He knew that he had to take practical steps to counter his envy. Envy thrived on comparison, and comparison led only to dissatisfaction and resentment. So, Ethan decided to actively combat his negative thoughts. He made a commitment to stop comparing himself to others. Every time a jealous thought crept into his mind, he would immediately replace it with a thought of gratitude. Instead of resenting his colleague's success, he would thank God for the opportunity to work alongside such talented people. Instead of feeling jealous of his friend's new possessions, he would thank God for the blessings in his own life. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to cultivate a heart of gratitude. Every day, he took time to reflect on the blessings he had received, his family, his health, his job, his home, and thank God for them. This practice of gratitude began to transform Ethan's mindset. He was no longer focused on what he didn't have, but on what he had already been given. And as he shifted his focus, his feelings of envy started to fade. He no longer felt a constant sense of dissatisfaction. Instead, he began to experience contentment and peace. It wasn't that he no longer had struggles or challenges. It was that he had learned to embrace them with a heart full of gratitude, knowing that God was with him every step of the way. The transformation was not just internal. It began to show in his relationships as well. As Ethan's heart softened, his relationships with others grew stronger. He found himself celebrating the successes of his colleagues and friends, rather than resenting them. He began to build deeper, more meaningful connections, grounded in love and support. His jealousy had driven a wedge between him and the people he cared about, but now, his gratitude was bringing him closer to them. As the months went by, Ethan continued on the path of redemption. There were still moments when envy would try to creep back into his life, but he had learned how to recognize it for what it was, a destructive force that had no place in his heart. And when those moments came, he would turn to God in prayer, trusting that he would give him the strength to resist. Ethan's journey was far from over. He knew that redemption was a continual process, one that required constant effort and reliance on God's grace. But with each step he took, he felt more at peace, more aligned with God's will, and more free from the grip of envy. As you reflect on Ethan's journey, think about your own life. Is envy holding you back? Are there areas of your life where jealousy or comparison are stealing your peace? If so, what steps can you take to start the journey of redemption? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We're all on this journey together, and by sharing our experiences, we can encourage and support one another. And if this story inspired you, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content that can help you overcome struggles and find peace in your faith. Together, we can grow in God's love and grace every day. In the months following Ethan's journey of introspection, confession, and spiritual growth, he began to experience a profound transformation. The chains that once bound him, his envy, bitterness, and resentment, started to lose their grip. At first, it was subtle. He found himself no longer comparing himself to others, no longer feeling the same pang of jealousy when he saw the success or happiness of those around him. The envy that had once been so pervasive in his life, a quiet undercurrent of dissatisfaction, began to fade. This change did not happen overnight. It was the result of intentional, daily effort, a commitment to prayer, a deepened relationship with God, and a genuine desire to grow. Ethan had started this journey of redemption thinking that overcoming his envy would be a matter of willpower alone. However, as he began to walk this path, he quickly realized that humility and grace were the keys to true transformation. As Ethan's relationship with God deepened, so did his understanding of the power of humility. He had spent so much of his life focused on comparison, always looking at others with a sense of inadequacy or jealousy. But in his moments of prayer and reflection, he began to understand that his true worth was not determined by the successes or possessions of others, but by his identity as a beloved child of God. Humility, he realized, was the antidote to envy. When he was humble, he no longer needed to compete with others. Instead, He could celebrate their successes and find joy in their achievements. One of the most significant realizations Ethan had during this time was that humility allowed him to let go of his pride. Envy often stems from a sense of insecurity, feeling that we are not enough or that we need to prove our worth in comparison to others. Ethan had spent much of his life striving for validation, seeking approval from others, and measuring his success against theirs. But humility taught him that he didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to be better than anyone else. He just needed to be faithful to the path God had set before him. This shift in mindset was liberating. Ethan began to embrace his imperfections, his struggles, and his limitations. He stopped trying to be someone he wasn't and began to focus on becoming the person God had created him to be. And in doing so, he found peace. He found a deep sense of contentment that came from within, not from the external validation he had once sought so desperately. In the process, Ethan also experienced the power of God's grace in a way he had never known before. He had always believed in God's grace intellectually, but now he was experiencing it on a deeper, more personal level. He had learned to surrender his will to God's plan, trusting that God's timing and provision were far better than anything he could have imagined. It was through this surrender that Ethan found the strength to let go of envy and embrace a life of gratitude and joy. As the months went on, Ethan's transformation became evident to those around him. He no longer carried the weight of jealousy in his heart. He no longer felt the need to compete with others or resent their successes. Instead, he celebrated their achievements with genuine happiness, understanding that their success did not diminish his own worth or value. Ethan found joy in the victories of others, and in doing so, his heart became freer and more open to the love and grace of God. Ethan's newfound humility also led him to a deeper sense of community. He began to engage more meaningfully with others, building relationships that were rooted in mutual respect and love rather than comparison or competition. He found that when he let go of envy, he was able to connect with people on a deeper level. His friendships became more authentic, and he found a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. But Ethan's transformation didn't stop there. He felt a deep calling to share his story with others. He wanted others to know that it was possible to overcome envy, that redemption and healing were within reach for anyone who was willing to humble themselves before God and seek His grace. Ethan realized that the power of his story was not in his perfection, but in his vulnerability and willingness to admit his shortcomings. He began to share his experiences with others, his friends, his family, and even strangers he met along the way. He encouraged them not to be ashamed of their struggles, not to hide in the darkness of their sins, but to bring them into the light of God's love. He reminded them that God's grace was always available, always ready to heal and transform. And in doing so, Ethan found that the more he shared, the more he was healed. Through his own journey, Ethan learned that victory over envy was not just about defeating a negative emotion. It was about embracing humility, trusting in God's grace, and living a life of gratitude. He discovered that when he stopped comparing himself to others, when he let go of his need to be better than everyone else, he could finally experience true freedom. And that freedom came not from achieving success or accumulating possessions, but from living a life grounded in God's love. One of the most profound lessons Ethan learned during this time was the importance of humility in the Christian life. Humility, he realized, was not about thinking less of himself, but about thinking of himself less. It was about turning away from self-centeredness and focusing on others, celebrating their successes, supporting them in their struggles, and walking alongside them on their journey of faith. It was through humility that Ethan was able to break free from the chains of envy and step into the fullness of God's love. As Ethan continued on his journey, he found that his battle with envy was not over. There were still moments of temptation, times when old habits tried to creep back into his heart. But now, he had the tools to fight back. He had learned to recognize the signs of envy before it took root, and he knew how to respond with humility and grace. He no longer sought validation from the world, but from God. And with that, he had found peace. Ethan's story is a reminder that victory over envy is not something that happens instantly. It is a lifelong process, a continual journey of surrendering to God and embracing humility. But the rewards are immeasurable. When we let go of envy and embrace gratitude, when we choose humility over pride, we open ourselves up to the fullness of God's grace and peace. We find that true joy comes not from comparing ourselves to others, but from celebrating the blessings God has given us and trusting in His perfect plan for our lives. If Ethan's story has inspired you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What steps are you taking to overcome envy in your own life? How has humility and grace made a difference in your journey of faith? We'd love to hear from you, and together, we can encourage one another as we continue on the path to redemption. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. Our journey is just beginning, and together, we can grow in God's love and grace every day. Over time, Ethan's life underwent a profound transformation. What began as a small, quiet shift in his heart soon blossomed into a radical change that reshaped not only his personal life but also his relationships with others and his connection to God. After struggling with the weight of envy and experiencing its destructive effects, he found himself living in the light of God's grace. This new life wasn't one of perfection, but of healing and progress, proof that redemption is not just possible, but within reach for anyone who seeks it with a humble heart. The core of Ethan's transformation was his deepened relationship with God. The envy that had once tainted his view of the world, making him see the successes of others as threats to his own worth, slowly faded away. As he walked closer to God, he discovered the true joy that comes from living in His presence, not defined by comparison, but by divine love. God began to replace his resentment and bitterness with peace and gratitude. His life became a living testament to the power of God's love and mercy. This was not to say that Ethan's journey was without challenges. Like anyone seeking to grow spiritually, he faced moments of doubt and temptation. But his connection to God became a refuge, something that provided him with the strength to resist the urges that once controlled him. And while the battle with envy might never have completely disappeared, it no longer had the power over him that it once did. It no longer dictated his thoughts, his feelings, or his actions. In fact, it became clear that Ethan was no longer living for himself, but for God and for others. As his heart healed, Ethan found himself drawn to helping others who were facing the same struggles. His life, once marked by discontent and jealousy, became a beacon of hope for those lost in their own battles with sin. He understood that while his personal victory over envy was meaningful, it was even more important to share what he had learned with others. And so, he began leading prayer groups, offering guidance, and providing a safe space for others to confess their struggles and find solace in God's love. In these groups, Ethan didn't speak from a place of superiority, but from a place of humility. He shared his own story, not as one who had perfected the art of overcoming envy, but as one who had learned to lean on God and trust in His healing. He was transparent, admitting his past failures, but also showing that it was possible to overcome. His vulnerability became a source of strength for others. They saw in Ethan not a perfect man, but a man who had experienced God's mercy firsthand. And that was something they could relate to and aspire to for themselves. Ethan also began writing reflections, small pieces of wisdom drawn from his experiences and rooted in Scripture. He took inspiration from the Bible, often turning to passages that spoke of humility, gratitude, and the importance of loving others without jealousy. He also reflected on the teachings of saints like Padre Pio, who had shown great courage and strength in overcoming their own struggles with sin. Padre Pio's life had been one of great spiritual depth and unwavering faith, and Ethan saw in his example a roadmap for how to overcome the challenges of daily life. Through these reflections, Ethan became an encouragement to others. His words were never meant to be preachy or judgmental. Instead, they were invitations to those struggling with envy and other sins to come closer to God. He didn't offer easy solutions or quick fixes, but he shared practical advice on how to find peace in the midst of spiritual battles. He reminded others that God's grace is always available, but it requires effort and openness on our part to receive it. One of the most powerful messages that Ethan shared in his reflections was the idea of community. No one can walk the path of redemption alone, he emphasized. We need each other, whether it's through prayer, support, or simply a listening ear. Ethan's own transformation was deeply rooted in the love and encouragement he received from others, and he now offered that same love in return. He encouraged his readers to build strong, supportive relationships with others who would help them stay accountable and uplifted as they worked through their own struggles. As Ethan's reputation grew, so did his sense of responsibility. He understood that the more he shared his story, the more he could help others experience their own healing. His mission was clear: to help people see that redemption was not just possible, but something that could be accessed in their everyday lives, through simple acts of faith, humility, and surrender. He believed that God's love was stronger than any sin, and that no one was beyond redemption. In many ways, Ethan's life became a living example of grace. He learned to forgive himself for his past mistakes, and through that forgiveness, he found the strength to forgive others. The peace he had sought for so long was now his daily companion. And instead of living in fear of his shortcomings, he embraced them as opportunities for growth. His journey was never about being perfect, It was about striving to live a life that reflected God's love and mercy. As he continued to help others, Ethan began to see the ripple effect of his actions. People who had once been trapped in their own cycles of envy, jealousy, or self-doubt began to break free. They found hope in his story and began to take their own steps toward healing. Some found peace in their relationships, while others found courage to pursue their dreams without comparing themselves to others. Through this process, Ethan's own faith grew stronger. He realized that healing wasn't just about erasing the past or avoiding sin. It was about learning to live with integrity, joy, and trust in God's plan. And that trust was something that grew over time. Each day, he found himself more and more at peace with who he was and where God was leading him. He no longer sought approval from the world, but from the God who had created him for a unique and meaningful purpose. Looking back, Ethan could see how far he had come. His life had been transformed, not because he had conquered every flaw or sin, but because he had chosen to live in the light of God's love. And as he shared his story with others, he continued to be amazed by the power of God's grace to heal, restore, and redeem. Now, Ethan's story was no longer just his own. It had become a shared experience, a journey that others could join. The lessons he had learned along the way were ones that could apply to anyone, regardless of their struggles or background. The message of his life was simple. With faith, humility, and grace, anyone can experience transformation. No sin is too great for God's mercy, and no heart is too broken to be healed. Ethan's life had been transformed by God's grace, but that transformation was not just for him. It was for all who were willing to embrace it. His story continues to inspire others to find freedom from their own struggles and to seek a life of peace, joy, and love. And that is a message worth sharing with the world. As you reflect on Ethan's journey and the lessons he learned along the way, we would love to hear your thoughts. How have you experienced transformation in your own life? What steps are you taking to overcome challenges and live a life that reflects God's love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to take their first step toward redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiration and encouragement. Together, we can continue to grow in faith and walk this journey of transformation together. As we come to the end of this journey, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed so far and dive into the power of transformation. How even the deepest struggles and most overwhelming sins can be overcome with God's grace. If you've been with us from the start, you've already witnessed the power of redemption in the life of Ethan, a man who was once trapped in the devastating grip of envy but found healing, peace, and true joy through humility and a deep connection with God. In the beginning, we saw how Ethan's life appeared calm on the surface. He had a decent job, a group of friends, and a stable routine. But beneath it all, there was something eating away at his soul: envy. He found himself constantly comparing his life to others, feeling bitter about their successes and resentful of their happiness. This is a struggle that many of us can relate to at some level. How often do we look at the achievements of others and feel inadequate, jealous, or frustrated that we haven't achieved what they have? How many times do we feel like we're not enough because someone else seems to be ahead of us in life? But Ethan's story didn't end in despair. And that's one of the most powerful lessons we can take from his journey. No matter how deeply entrenched a sin or struggle may be, there is always hope for change. Ethan didn't just continue down the path of bitterness and resentment. Instead, he chose to face his sin head-on, acknowledging that it was affecting not just his relationships with others, but his very relationship with God. This is the first step to healing, admitting that there's a problem and deciding to seek a better way. The key to Ethan's transformation was his willingness to seek help. He didn't try to fight his battle in isolation. He found comfort in confession, allowing himself to open up to God and ask for strength. He took inspiration from the teachings of saints like Padre Pio, whose life demonstrated that no matter how big the struggle, with God's help, we can overcome it. As Ethan turned to prayer, scripture, and self-reflection, he began to develop new habits that slowly chipped away at his envy. He learned to embrace gratitude, recognizing the blessings in his life and celebrating the victories of others instead of feeling threatened by them. The turning point in Ethan's story came when he listened to a homily based on Galatians 5 verses 19 to 21, where St. Paul warned of the fruits of the flesh, envy among them, and the destructive consequences they could have on our souls. It was in that moment of reflection that Ethan realized how deeply envy had been eating away at him. It was affecting his peace, his joy, and his ability to connect with God. But rather than allowing this realization to lead him into despair, he saw it as an opportunity for redemption. And that's where the true transformation began. Through continued self-reflection, prayer, and the support of a loving community, Ethan discovered that overcoming envy wasn't just about suppressing negative emotions. It was about cultivating a deeper love for others, for God, and for the life he had given him. Ethan started to focus on living for something greater than himself. He learned that true happiness isn't found in comparison, but in trusting God's unique plan for each of us. Ethan's life wasn't perfect, but it was radically changed. His story didn't end with him keeping his transformation to himself. Instead, he became a source of hope for others. He shared his journey, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had walked the path of redemption and could guide others to do the same. His story wasn't about self-perfection, but about embracing the power of grace and learning how to live with humility, gratitude, and love. This transformation that Ethan went through is available to all of us. Whatever your struggles are, whether envy, pride, fear, or anger, God's grace is sufficient to heal you and bring you back to a place of peace. It's not about being perfect, and it's not about never having challenges. It's about acknowledging your struggles, seeking God's help, and allowing Him to transform you from the inside out. That's the true meaning of redemption. Now, I want to take a moment to offer you a deeper dive into more content that can help you along your own journey of spiritual growth and transformation. If you found Ethan's story powerful and inspiring, I encourage you to check out our playlist, where you'll find more videos on overcoming common struggles, finding peace in your relationship with God, and learning how to live a life filled with grace and purpose. These topics are not just about information, they are about transformation. Each video is designed to help you take the next step in your walk with God, whether it's overcoming envy, letting go of past hurts, or building a stronger spiritual foundation. We've curated this playlist specifically for people like you. People who are seeking change, people who want to grow in their faith and experience the freedom that comes from living in the light of God's love. These videos are not just for watching, they're for living. They're for applying the wisdom you gain to your everyday life, and they're for helping you find the tools and encouragement you need to overcome your own battles. Whether you're dealing with envy, anxiety, or any other challenge, we've got content that speaks directly to your struggles and offers real, practical advice on how to move forward. I encourage you to take the next step today. Click on the playlist link below and start watching videos that will equip you to grow spiritually and emotionally. The journey of transformation doesn't stop here. It's a lifelong process, and every step you take brings you closer to the life of peace, joy, and purpose that God wants for you. And as we wrap up, I want to hear from you. How has this video impacted you? Do you see areas in your life where you've struggled with envy or other negative emotions? What steps are you planning to take to seek God's help and transform your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reflections and stories. You're not alone in your struggles, and your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to take that first step toward healing. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. We're building a community of people who are committed to growing in their faith and experiencing the transformation that comes through God's love and grace. Don't miss out on the future videos we have planned. Hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this journey together. Thank you for being part of this community. I can't wait to see the transformations that are waiting for you.